Would you like to step into the daily life of one of history's most fascinating civilizations? I think your answer is yes, so let's get started. Throughout history, there have been very few states that reached borders as vast as Rome, developed their own unique culture and governance system over many long years, and had such an impact on humanity. Despite this, we don't actually know how the state was founded. We can only make guesses based on legends. The most famous of these legends is the story of two brothers named Romulus and Remus. Before we dive into daily life in Rome, let's examine the founding legend of this magnificent empire. The legend of Romulus and Remus. The legend begins with a local king named Numitor being overthrown by his brother Amulius. The overthrown King Numitor had a daughter named Rhea Silva. Silva wasn't killed but was sent to a temple because the punishment for giving birth in the temple was death. This way, no new heir to the throne would be born. However, according to legend, she was impregnated by Mars, the god of war. From this pregnancy, two children were born, Romulus and Remus. Upon this, King Amulius, who had seized the throne, had Silva drowned in the river and placed the children in baskets, leaving them in the river as well. The basket, carried by the current, eventually got caught on the branches of a fig tree. A female wolf nursed and raised Remus and Romulus until a shepherd found them. This event became the subject of many statues in Rome. The twins, raised by the shepherd and his wife, grew into young, strong warriors. Learning their true identities, Remus and Romulus returned to their birthplace, killed the cruel king, and returned the throne to their grandfather, Numitor. Later, leaving there, Remus and Romulus decided to go to the place where they had washed ashore in the basket and found a city there. When they began to establish the city, a fight broke out between the two brothers over a simple disagreement. In a moment of rage, Romulus killed his brother Remus and founded the city alone. This city, founded by Romulus, took the name Rome. The date of its founding is accepted by the Romans as April 21, 753 BC. Actually, although we have no sources other than legend, estimates show approximately these periods. The fratricidal conflicts and leadership struggles experienced in this legend are thought to be a reflection of the internal turmoil experienced throughout all phases of Rome. Roman houses. So what was the daily life of Roman people like? Come on, let's take an adventure-filled journey together 2,000 years into the past. We can divide Roman houses into two types, domus and insula. Domus was the name given to a private residence in ancient Rome. They could be various sizes, from small houses to structures that fit the definition of palace. A single family lived in these residences. Domus-style houses belonging to wealthy families were quite spacious and large. In fact, they often had ornate gardens inside. Since these gardens were surrounded on all sides by walls or other rooms of the house, they couldn't be seen from outside. They were decorated with columns, statues, various plants, and small fountains. In good weather, the household spent a significant part of the day in these gardens. If the weather was nice, meals were eaten here, daily meetings were held here, and the family would spend all activities they would do in other rooms of the house in the garden. Compared to today's gardens, these gardens, equipped much more frequently with plants and fountains, could be full of greenery that could be considered suffocating. These gardens were called hortus. You're currently seeing an example of a hortus on screen. Another important part of the house was the atrium. The atrium was a courtyard usually with a pool in the middle, surrounded by other rooms. It was one of the most important parts of the house, and Romans welcomed their guests and freedmen here, and this was the center where daily affairs revolved. Bedrooms, family sitting rooms, and kitchens opened onto the atrium. It was generally open-topped, sometimes partially roofed. It had a calm environment, away from the heat and noise of the outside world. The pool in the middle was both decor and had an important function to collect rainwater. If you were to enter a wealthy person's house during the Roman period, you could see slaves running after duties throughout the day, and the homeowners in the atrium section of the house. Surrounded by columns and opening to many rooms, the atrium was an architecture that provided top-level benefits both aesthetically and in terms of comfort. It became a signature in the Roman period and was frequently used in many houses, temples, and palaces. In hot weather, this was the activity area of the house. There were braziers, tables, and mirrors, and at feasts organized by the homeowners, theater plays, various shows, dances, and sometimes even small gladiator fights were held here to entertain guests. In this section, families with noble ancestors would have masks made from plaster casts of their ancestors' faces. A noble family could have dozens of masks. The masks were generally made by taking a plaster cast from the person's face after they died. Some nobles, to show their prestige at feasts they organized in their homes, would create a visual feast by placing an oil lamp or candle behind each mask. Insulae, Roman apartment buildings. The places where mostly poor and destitute Roman families lived were places called insulae, which resembled today's apartment buildings. Rising up to 9 floors, insulae were built to reduce costs and house Rome's increasing population. There were insulae where the middle class or lower tier stayed, depending on your budget, and most would be single rooms. There would be no water, toilet, or kitchen. All needs were met in the house's single room or, if your economy was good, in 2 or 3 rooms. An average of 200 people lived in an insula, and rent was paid to the property owners. Greek historian Polybius relates what he said about a Roman senator as follows: "The animals on the ground and the birds in the sky have nests and places to be protected, but the people who fight and die for Italy can only access the grace of daylight and air. Look at the houses rising like towers, houses rising 10 floors on top of each floor." These buildings weren't just homes consisting of rooms without sanitary facilities and kitchens, cold, airless, and extremely crowded. They were also poorly constructed technically. He describes them elsewhere. They would sway with every wind that blew. In other words, insulae were very unsafe places. Lower floors were used for shopping and entertainment venues, meaning taverns, while upper floors were built for accommodation purposes. Romans were the first civilization to build multi-story structures with insulae. Today, insula remains are most commonly seen in Rome and Ostia. In insulae where the lowest tier lived, up to 40 people would live together in a 400 square meter room. After frequent fires and collapses, Emperor Augustus limited the height to 70 Roman feet, which is equivalent to 20 meters. After the Great Fire of Rome, Emperor Nero reduced the height to 60 Roman feet, or 17.5 meters. Insulae are structures that laid the foundation for today's apartment living and opened the door to epidemic diseases due to their dense crowds. Due to security problems and extra stair floors, the top floors of insulae were the least desired and therefore the cheapest to rent. There was a common toilet. Besides that, there would be pots used as chamber pots in rooms or in multi-room insula houses. The rooms where the poorest stayed were called cellae, and it wasn't surprising to see many people staying in the same room in a packed manner. These sections were generally located on the uppermost floors, where access was most difficult, and you might have to climb an average of 200 steps. Thanks to poor workmanship, foundations, and construction materials, sometimes they were built so unsturdy that bricks or wall materials would frequently collapse and kill passers-by. Lawyers of the time recorded as a nightmare trying to determine who was legally responsible, the property owner, the tenant, or the subtenant, when someone passing by was injured in an accident.
In this context, we encountered the insularius, the responsible watchman of each insula, and the fire brigade figure. Fire brigade teams always had the right to check inside to see if there was a problem. Some of the most famous Romans were slum landlords. For example, the famous philosopher, orator, and politician Cicero received a large portion of his income from rents in the insulae. He talks to his best friend Atticus about converting an old bathhouse into small apartments and encourages his friend to make a higher offer than anyone else for the property he wants. We know that the extremely wealthy Marcus Crassus allegedly waited for buildings to burn down. Perhaps he even burned his own insulae to build new ones and rent them out at high rates. It was possible to see a mother cooking on a brazier in one corner of the room, a father resting tired after working all day in the other corner, and a child playing with small gladiator toys. The inner rooms of insulae had no windows at all. Sunlight didn't enter all day. Therefore, they were frequently lit with lamps. The lowest level insulae were temporary accommodation places preferred more by bachelors. Romans with better budgets, especially if they were married, could move to mid-level insulae. In such places where rents were a bit higher, 8 to 10 apartments would be built opening to a common courtyard. Houses could be 2 or 4 rooms. The common courtyard was both the entrance and daily living area. All the women in the insula would cook their meals here, eat here, and conversations and daily activities would again take place here. Washing clothes, even sometimes bathing needs, were done in this common courtyard of the insula. In other words, everyone living in an insula witnessed each other's entire lives in every way. In such mid-level insulae, there would be a common toilet in the courtyard. Women would go to help each other when doing daily chores. People would spend most of their day in this courtyard. Children would play their games here. We can interpret the life in these insulae consisting of 8 to 10 apartments and looking out to a common courtyard as families living together in a large house. To house the enormous and variable population of Rome, tens of thousands of such apartment blocks were needed. A list of buildings in the city shows that there were more than 44,000 insulae, and if this is correct, some must have been quite small, as we mentioned.
Clothing and fashion. The tunic was a practical garment for every Roman. The tunic, frequently mentioned in the Roman period, is the basic garment form for both Roman men and women. The length of the tunic used was at mid-calf for men, while for women of all status it extended to the ground or ankles. Loose-flowing or sometimes used with a belt at the waist, the tunic was mostly used with a belt in Rome, except for mourning, summer, or religious ceremonies. In various seasons, the tunic, usually extending below the knee, was worn as a single piece, and sandals were worn on the feet. Everyone, slaves or workers, wore tunics. They woke up in tunics and slept in them. Workers' tunics were shorter so they could move comfortably. In cold weather, they would wear 2 or 3 tunics on top of each other. From the notes of Roman historian Suetonius, it's understood that Emperor Augustus wore 4 layers of tunic, a heavy toga, a woolen chest protector, and an undershirt in winter months, and also used a covering that wrapped his legs and hips. It was possible to find tunics with different designs for every type of citizen. Ornate and wide tunics extending to the wrists for women, sleeveless and short tunics for guards and soldiers, ornate tunics for young girls were types of clothing that would appear at any moment in daily life. The toga, Rome's most characteristic garment, was an upper-class position-indicating outfit. If you were walking around in a toga on the streets of Rome, it meant you had power to be feared. The punishment for an ordinary person wearing a toga was death. The toga is the most characteristic garment of ancient Rome, obtained by wrapping a sash about 6 meters long around the body in a certain way, and generally worn over a tunic. The toga was made exclusively of wool, and the tunic worn underneath was generally made of linen. Throughout Roman history, while the toga was generally worn by men, women preferred to wear the stola. The toga is the oldest known garment of the Romans. The toga, which was removed when working in closed spaces or in fields, was worn only outdoors. We learn this from a story from Cincinnatus. One day, while he was working in the field, a senatorial envoy came to inform him that he had been declared dictator by the Senate. Dictatorship was a respected and official position in Rome. At this time, seeing the envoy coming from afar, Cincinnatus immediately sent his wife to the house to bring his toga, and thus was able to receive the delegation appropriately. The truth of the story may be debatable, but it's still a good example of the Romans' sensitivity on the subject. However, the toga maintained its existence as the empire's dominant robe. Since the toga wasn't worn by soldiers, it was also considered a sign of peace. Civilians were sometimes called togatus, meaning wearing a toga, in contrast to the sagum worn by soldiers. In Cicero's work, De Officiis, the phrase sedant arma togae means exactly let peace replace war, or let military power turn into civilian power. Let arms yield to the toga. The palla was a long rectangular piece of fabric that Roman women used like a coat outside the house. Just like Near Eastern women today, in ancient Rome too, women didn't go outside without modestly covering themselves with a covering. Outside the house, women covered their bodies and probably their heads with the palla to protect themselves from both the cold and improper display. Thus, they thought they were protected from any bad looks or inappropriate behavior. Varying according to changing climate conditions, the palla was generally prepared from woolen fabrics for cold winter days and from cotton or silk fabrics for hot summer days. Roman women would choose the color of the palla they wore to either contrast or harmonize with their other clothes. Although the palla was used in many different forms, it was most commonly designed to completely cover the head and body. Undergarments. Although men generally preferred not to wear underwear, according to those depicted in mosaics, it's seen that they wore tight underwear similar to today's athletic briefs. For workers and slaves, underwear could be the only clothing on them while working. However, it's hard to say that Roman men preferred wearing underwear as a daily habit. As for women, we see in various mosaics that they wore chest bands and panties. Although street dancers preferred to be naked, women used tight chest bands resembling headbands. White and folded fabric panties or panties made from materials like leather or linen in various colors were both a protection for menstruation and one of the displays of noble women. Indeed, women in those years preferred tighter underwear because they wanted to have thin body lines. Apart from these, it's not really possible to talk about underwear in Rome. Hygiene in Rome. It wouldn't be wrong to say there are significant differences in approach to hygiene between people from 2,500 years ago and modern humans. Having water in every area of their lives, the Roman people had the chance to meet their cleanliness needs thanks to the aqueducts coming to the city. There were 1,300 fountains and 200 public toilets called latrinae in the city, and people carried water to their homes in buckets. A complex sewage network accompanied the system. While water was delivered to public areas like baths through lead pipes, for other places it was necessary to carry it by bucket. Unless you were from Rome's upper class, of course, because palaces or some large houses also had water systems. Public toilets were one of the places where Roman people socialized. It can't be said that Romans were shy when using the toilet. In a large room, side by side and opposite each other, both conversations were held and toilet needs were met on perforated marbles built on a strip with water flowing underneath. While the water flowing from below fulfilled the drain function, anal cleaning was done by attaching sponges that Romans always carried with them to a stick. These sticks were sticks everyone used in common. The sponges belonged to the individual and were kept in a pocket with cloth. After this process, the sponge was cleaned with water passing through a small channel flowing from the front. Often this cleaning wasn't done at all. You're currently seeing a Roman toilet on screen. In ancient cities like Ephesus, too, Roman toilets preserved almost as on the first day stand in place. Although Romans who had private toilets weren't found much in these public areas, it's known that some high-level Roman bureaucrats went to these toilets and participated in toilet conversations to take the pulse of the people, or for some political activities. In other words, toilets were a great social network, very good places to hear daily gossip, meet with a friend and talk, or simply discuss business. And of course, urine was too valuable to be wasted. While today we flush it away without hesitation, in ancient times, urine was regarded as a valuable commodity. Urine contained a wide variety of minerals and chemicals like potassium and phosphorus. Romans believed that urine whitened teeth and protected them from decay. Therefore, they used urine to make toothpaste by mixing it with gargle and pumice stone. According to the Romans, the best and therefore most expensive urine on the market came from Portugal. This urine was allegedly the strongest in the world and therefore was preferred for whitening teeth. Although most people today would reject a urine-based toothpaste, urine actually worked because urine contains ammonia, a substance found in many cleaning materials today. If you leave urine in an open container, it will start to decompose and then produce ammonia from contact with air. Moreover, during the imperial period, it was also used for laundry. Thanks to its ammonia solution, urine was also important in the developing textile sector throughout the Roman state. Actually, if you look at it, urine was frequently used for whitening wool and laundry and tanning leather. It was purchased by the barrel by the public, kept at home or in the garden for those lucky enough, and clothing was cleaned this way. In the 1st century AD, Roman Emperor Nero implemented a new taxation known in Latin as vectigall urinae, meaning urine tax. This tax functionally taxed urine collected from public areas, because lower classes relieved their needs by emptying into cesspools through small jars. Besides this, urine was also collected from public toilets. The person receiving urine would pay tax in return. Then, urine was collected from the cesspool and transformed into a valuable raw material by going through a series of chemical processes. In this context, don't think that everywhere smelled of urine and clothes came out bright yellow from cleaning, because urine was raw material for cleaning products and was processed through various processes to make it usable. However, we can say there was a general sewage smell in the city due to urine conversion facilities, public toilets, and people emptying their toilets in various places. So much so that according to law, urine made in containers had to be emptied into the cesspool. But Romans who didn't want to walk to the cesspool would generally empty urine containers even front doors. In fact, residents of upper floors of insulae would even pour toilet containers out the window. Although this situation was tried to be prevented by laws issued from time to time, insula residents who sometimes had to climb 200 steps to reach their homes never gave up pouring toilet containers outside. However, it must be stated that Romans are clearly the society that loved bathing most in the world of that period, and the bath architecture they developed is still used today.
Those who started their work at dawn would finish their work toward noon hours and take their rest in the bath. Now it was time for entertainment and rest. It had a low fee and was free for children. It was announced to the public by ringing a bell located on roofs where baths were cleaned and water was ready. Baths generally used during the day are known to have opened and been used at night in some cases as well. However, this wasn't a very common practice because night use created problems, especially in terms of lighting costs and security. Roman baths were designed for bathing and resting and were a common feature of cities throughout the Roman state. Baths contained a wide variety of rooms with different temperatures, as well as swimming pools and sections for reading books, relaxing, and socializing. With their large, enclosed spaces, Roman baths were particularly important driving forces in architectural innovations, especially in the use of domes. Baths were built using fireproof fired clay bricks, and finished buildings were generally decorated with fine mosaic floors, marble-covered walls, and decorative statues and magnificent works. Similar features that Roman baths contained included changing rooms, exercise rooms, open-air swimming pools, extremely heated dry and wet sweating rooms, heated and hot water pools, heated and lukewarm pool rooms, generally of monumental size and domed, unheated and cool bathrooms with cool rooms. These were the heart of baths. Rooms for massage and other health practices like these were available. Additional structures like cold water plunge pools, private baths, libraries, conference halls, and open gardens were also included. For Romans, these baths were an important part of their daily life. They went every day and stayed for a few hours. Wealthy Romans would also bring slaves with them to serve them. The slaves brought generally undertook the duty of carrying towels and drinks. There were also officials kept ready for massage services and skin care. All Romans could access these services, and fees were kept very low. Romans who got over the day's stress, as mothers, fathers, and children, were already ready to spend time at the bath all day. Before bathing in Roman baths, sports work was done. Running, weightlifting, and wrestling can be given as examples. After the exercises, attendants would oil the masters and then scrape off the oil with the help of a piece of wood or bone. In this way, they were cleansed of major dirt. Body cleansing in Roman baths was done with a tool called a strigil. With this tool, sweat, sand, and dust adhered to the body were removed. Then the body was oiled in an area called ellipterion. For hot water pools in spa style, the definition therma, or Greek thermos, was used. In the remains seen in Pompeii, it's seen that most public baths had separate sections for men and women. Some baths were heated from below in a furnace, while in some, water heated in a separate area was delivered to the pool through pipes. There would also be elevated sections in the pools in the bath that only the upper class could use, and these were called exedra. Apart from these, in the homes or palaces of wealthy Romans, there would also be large-sized baths, and sometimes naked entertainments were organized in these baths. Romans who had unlimited initiative over their slaves could organize entertainments in their own baths, either with prostitutes or with their slaves. You can easily imagine this scene in your mind. While a wealthy Roman is giving a sex party in his private bath, on one hand, musicians playing musical instruments like the harp or corn, on the other hand, slaves carrying fruits, wine, and food on their trays in their hands, always ready with their eyes on their masters, waiting to do the orders that will come. Of course, don't forget the male or female slaves sexually serving during this time. You can be sure that this scene was very frequently experienced in the private baths of Rome's wealthy. In the upcoming sections, we'll see the craziness in more detail when explaining sexual life in Rome.
Food in Rome. Romans' food culture started with breakfast in the early hours of the morning, just like in modern life and human nature. Urban Romans waking up before sunrise would first have breakfast. While the poor prepared to go to their jobs, they would have their breakfast on the go, consisting of bread, water, wine, olives, and perhaps cheese. The public didn't have enough variety to set a table for breakfast, so it was passed as a snack, or sometimes just bread was eaten. The wealthy would sit down to a rich breakfast consisting of meat, fish, vegetables, fruits, honey, and bread, because sugar wasn't yet known at that time. We need to remind you that although the Roman state was based in Italy, it was a state spread across the entire Mediterranean, parts of Europe, and parts of Africa. Of course, as a Mediterranean civilization, one of their basic foods was olive oil, the other was wine. We know that the production and trade of both were done intensively, and the country's granary was Egypt. An internal turmoil or rebellion that would occur in Egypt could even cause Romans to die of hunger. Indeed, during the struggle of Mark Antony going to Egypt, marrying Cleopatra, and trying to seize rule against Rome, grain imports from Egypt to Rome were cut off. The people had to eat cats, dogs, and rats, and even cannibalism was seen. But at that time, tomatoes, which have an important place in today's Mediterranean cuisine, weren't known. Most fruits and vegetables didn't exist or weren't popular. Fruits like grapes, figs, apples, and pears were consumed abundantly by Romans. Willow, turnip, eggs, fish, and pork, along with legumes, also had an important place in Roman food culture. Vegetables like chard, artichokes, beet leaves, and asparagus were very popular, and we see them featured abundantly in recipes left from the Romans. Perhaps history's first cookbook, the book titled De Re Coquinaria, On Cooking, is one of the important sources describing Roman cuisine and surviving to the present day. In the book written by the Roman gourmet Apicius, detailed information is given about recipes and quality ingredients. From Apicius's descriptions, we understand that Romans didn't particularly prefer cattle, sheep, and goats for meat purposes because they used them in field work and got milk from them. Instead, they used pork, chicken, and various birds in meat dishes. Although fish, sea urchins, mussels, oysters, octopus, and other seafood were Romans' favorite foods, not everyone had access to fish and seafood because their hunting was laborious. In ancient sources, garum or gyros sauce was used as a substitute for salt by both ancient Greeks and Romans. Garum, produced from fermented fish, entered the cuisine of all Romans, rich and poor, and was very popular. Romans, just like Greeks, drank wine diluted with seawater. However, before meals, as a starter, they were served with honeyed wine. Bread was one of the indispensable foods of Roman cuisine, and there were many ovens in Rome. Of course, very different from today's white bread, these were flat breads made with whole grain and sourdough. Honey was used both in desserts and to add flavor to dishes. Aromatic herbs like rosemary, coriander, and anise, spices like cumin, cinnamon, and cloves were known and used, but black pepper had a special place. Since poor Romans didn't have kitchens in their homes and generally tried to meet all their needs on the brazier in the room, and also because preservative elements like refrigerators hadn't been invented yet, they generally consumed fast food type foods sold at small street stalls. These were the lowest tier Romans and generally formed the working class. In the menus of wealthy Romans, we also see ancient animals and bird species brought from distant regions, like pelicans. The most important activity of the evening was the dinner called cena in Latin. In Roman villas, there was characteristically a room set aside for dinner. Romans called this room triclinium. In Latin literature, triclinium is used to mean 3 couches. We mentioned this reclining couch model at the beginning, and dinner was consumed on these couches,
either sitting forced or reclining more comfortably, and dinner had 3 stages. These were gustatio, meaning starter dishes. This stage can be read thanks to a menu from a banquet given by a wealthy Roman in his home surviving to the present day. Even just the introduction section covers more than most modern people's entire large meal. This introduction stage, called gustatio, is preparation for the meal, and the following are read in the record. Mulsum, a type of honeyed wine, herbed garlic cheese, poached eggs, mushrooms, boiled fresh cabbage and Brussels sprout salad, various types of sausages, pickled fish, snails, olives, bread. These were served for wealthy Romans waiting for the meal to pass time, and believe me, they would end with great abundance. The second stage, the main course stage, veal, various roasts of poultry, ostrich roasts, squid fry, fish fry, various meats. In the third stage, egg pudding, omelette, soufflé, figs, apples, apricots, cherries, dates, pistachios, almonds, walnuts, Falernian wine, and a dessert similar to today's pudding. Also, perfumes to change the air of the room were sprinkled around. Guests' heads and feet were decorated with wreaths made of flowers. Guests would choose among themselves a feast king, or head guest, and the chosen person would determine throughout the wine feast how much wine would be mixed with water and how much it would be drunk. Generally, they drank in turns and made many rounds. The most important of these was when a person raised his glass with wishes for goodness and health, saying, "Propino tibi bene," and finished the wine in one gulp. While meals were being eaten, theaters, gladiator shows, music concerts, and dancing girls added entertainment to the atmosphere. Although rarely seen, we also know that shows by slaves were performed. Depending on the host's wealth, presentations and activities could vary. For example, a cake or pastry would be brought for the most important guest to cut, and when the cake was cut, sparrows coming out would fly and scatter everywhere. This was done to entertain guests as one of the night's surprises. After the birds were set free, the cake would be taken back to the kitchen to be cooked better. We know from kitchen records that a wealthy Roman cooked 18 pigs at the same time, so much so that each pig was cooked for different times and at different temperatures according to taste, and it was made for only a 6-person table. So much was eaten at these tables that there were jars for vomiting and then continuing to eat. There wasn't specifically a vomit jar, but slaves who knew their masters kept ready a container like a toilet bowl so they could keep up with the speed of their master who wanted to vomit. Since struggling with going to the toilet would also remain very hypothetical, a Roman going to the other corner of the room during conversation would urinate in the toilet bowl and then continue eating. Sometimes a part of the room was separated with a curtain for the toilet. Bowls of water were circulated by slaves for hand washing, and everyone would easily wash their hands in the same water. If the household was crowded, there would be several chefs, each specialized in a different culinary art. This is similar to chefs who have gained skill in different branches of the kitchen, working on starter menus, pastries, etc. in today's restaurants. In addition to waiters, there was even a trained cutter and a scissor who prepared foods into pieces suitable for eating with a spoon or finger. The cutter would do this operation in front of guests as if presenting a big show. No matter how ornate and elegant the meals were, kitchens were very plain places. It was hard to see anything but a wide counter and braziers. Everything was very practical. Pots and pans and ladles hung on walls. Everyone's place was clear. So the dinners of wealthy Romans with comfortable and abundant conversation generally passed like this. The most important food businesses in the city were undoubtedly bread ovens. Bread ovens connected to guilds would be very large-scale because they had to feed a city population reaching 1 million, and bread was the staple food of Romans. From time to time during events in the agora, ovens would advertise, and bakers would try to direct customers to themselves with free bread distribution at festivals. If you had a large oven, it meant you were probably among the city's wealthy.
Entertainment life in Rome. Romans were people fond of entertainment. We can say this. Despite all the difficulties of the ancient world, they weren't unhappy people. In every period, festivals, games, shows, and various entertainment elements were both activities done by the Roman administration to keep the people happy, and also went on with various organizations' own work. In Romans' entertainment world, besides religious festivals, there were parties in taverns and theaters too. But of course, the shows the people waited for with the greatest excitement were gladiator games. Slaves or free Romans who wanted to earn money could participate with gladiator teams. These games didn't always end in death. They were more in the nature of sword and shield demonstrations. Indeed, human life was valuable then too, and if someone were to die in every show, no one could make money from this business. The Colosseum, whose construction was completed in AD 80, created a revolution for fights. Because it was built using tremendous engineering with pipe and insulation systems that could fill the arena with water, even sea battle shows, called namache, could be reenacted. Major Colosseum battles were generally carried out in the form of reenacting major games in Roman history. Hannibal the Carthaginian, Gauls, the conquest of Britain were the most frequently reenacted historical events, and each time they ended with Roman victory. After sea battles ended, the water in the arena was again drawn to reservoirs through channels. Female gladiators have also been encountered among gladiators. Although not very frequent, records of 20 to 30 female gladiators have been reached. During the imperial period, according to Senate laws, the Senate could not provide financial support for more than 2 gladiator shows per year, but there was no limit to gladiator shows the emperor would carry out. Despite this, gladiator games were received as rare and extraordinary events. For example, Emperor Augustus carried out gladiator shows only 8 times during his reign, lasting over 60 years. There was a steady increase in both the amount of game days held in Rome and regularly planned gladiator games in later times of the process. By the year 354 AD, games had taken place for 6 months of the year, including 102 days with theatrical entertainments, 64 days with chariot races, and 10 days with gladiator shows and beast hunts. For example, in addition to chariot races and gladiator fights that could be shown as the most popular of the games, quite different types of games and sports such as wild animal fights, running races, boxing, wrestling, various athletics competitions, and Troy games were also carried out. People sentenced to death were also brought out in the arena to wild animals or in front of other gladiators, and their executions were carried out this way. Although it's thought that Romans' chariot races, wrestling, and boxing competitions were carried out inspired by the Etruscans, it can be said that gladiator games were invented by the Romans themselves. In organizing athletics and running races, Greek sports had a great influence. However, an important point that needs to be stated on this subject is that Romans remained largely indifferent to Greek sports like athletics and running, and especially during the Republic period and the first years of the Imperial period, these sports weren't popular with the people. On this subject, Suetonius said that Emperor Augustus didn't participate in Greek games or races and didn't properly reward the winners of the competitions either. The reason for this situation encountered in Romans is basically shown as the nudity element contained in Greek sports.
Gutman explains this situation quite simply with the expression, "the sight of a naked runner seemed ridiculous to them." Emperor Augustus, also known as Octavius, is accepted as Rome's first emperor and is the nephew of Julius Caesar, who for a time pressured the Roman Senate and declared his official dictatorship. Described as cold as an iceberg and dignified as Aristotle, Emperor Augustus was also known for his conservatism, took a stand against nudity, banned prostitution for a time, and made it mandatory for women to marry and give birth. Interestingly, in examinations on the bodies of Ephesian gladiators from periods when the city of Ephesus was under Roman rule, it was seen that their diet was vegetarian. Drinks made from barley and a type of vegetable mixture greatly changed what we knew until today about Ephesian gladiators' diets. While they were expected to eat more protein-based for their wounds to heal faster, the discovery that they ate vegetable and grain-based instead carries Ephesian gladiators to an important place in medical history. Another important part of entertainment life in Rome were the special rooms made only for Roman wealthy men to organize feasts with their friends. Since the 6th century BC, the eating custom, adopted because it was thought to be luxurious and ostentatious, was taken from the East, Lydia, or the Persians. Only the man of the house and his guests could participate in such meals. While they ate separately, the woman and children of the house gathered around the hearth. Although the feast initially emerged with religious reasons, feasts after war and hunts, or warriors' habit of eating together with men's meeting places, from the 5th century BC onward it descended to the people and became a habit beyond luxury. Spaces seen in vase depictions from the 7th century BC, although not in every house, were found in the homes of rulers and aristocrats. The important furniture of these spaces was the couch-like reclining seat made of stone, wood, or bronze. The small space or round-topped three-legged table, like the cleanae, was among the indispensable items of these spaces. The table, due to its 3 legs, was easily carried, brought with the food on it during meals, and could be pushed under the cleanae when the meal was finished. In some depictions, we also see the footstool used as a climbing step to the cleanae, and on which shoes were placed when reclining on the cleanae. Vitruvius describes these rooms called andron as follows. Men's invitations are held in large rooms where 4 cleanae can easily fit with sufficient space for service and entertainment. According to traditions, it's not customary for the host to be present at such invitations. It's called andron because men live in these spaces undisturbed by women. Taverns were also important entertainment venues. Customers gathering in taverns, generally male, would drink wine and beer excessively, watch singer and dancer women's shows, gamble using stones or dice, and probably end the night with prostitutes too. While women generally entertained at family invitations, places like taverns were offered to men's service. Since every month of the year and some days of the week were dedicated to gods in Rome, religious festivals could be seen at any moment. At these festivals, street artists, actors, pantomimes, and singers would perform, and since the shows were financed by a wealthy Roman, they were free and open to the public. Slaves and prostitutes couldn't participate in religious festivals. Officials at the forum would announce festival dates, festival sponsors, and who couldn't participate. Fast food vendors, candy makers, and sellers setting up small toys on their stalls added color to festivals. Games and sports shows that can be said to have a very important position within social and political life in Rome were carried out in royal times mainly for more pagan origin religious purposes, like honoring the gods, but from the Republic period onward, they began to be carried out for various purposes, such as preventing broad sections of society from causing unrest and making political demands, celebrating great military victories, and winning the support of the people. For example, according to one of the Romans' legends, shows called Equiria were organized to honor Mars, the god of war, who was thought to be the father of Romulus, the founder and first king of Rome. Races organized in name of god Jupiter, Flora games organized in name of goddess Flora, Megalesian games organized in honor of goddess Cybele, and Ceres festival organized for goddess Ceres, and many more games and shows organized in the names of gods. Juvenal expresses quite successfully in his work Satires how the Roman state blunted its people's political demands and unrest. Long ago, our people can't sell our votes to anyone. The people long ago shed their concerns because the people who once gave authority, axes, legions, and everything now restrain themselves and greedily desire only two things: bread and circuses.
Education in Rome. In ancient Rome, education was informal family education at the beginning of the Republic, while in the late Republic and Imperial period, it progressed toward education based on a system. The Roman education system was based on the Greek education system, and most private teachers in the Roman education system were Greek slaves or, again, Greek freed persons. The education curriculum used in Rome was copied in all provinces of Rome and also formed the basis for later Western civilization education systems. Until the 2nd century AD, organized education was applied relatively rarely, and we have only a few pieces of information about the Roman education process applied until this time. Due to the extensive power the family father had over Roman families, the level and quality of education provided to Roman children showed great differences from family to family. Nevertheless, Roman culture would later develop in a way that expected fathers to educate their children to a degree. Any one Roman who wanted to enter politics was expected to have complete and high-level education. During the peak period of the Roman University and later the Roman Empire, the Roman education system gradually found its final form. Official schools that gave allowances to students were established, but there were very few educational institutions that provided free public education. Both boys and girls were educated compulsorily, although not necessarily together. In a manner very similar to the system dominant in the modern world, the Roman education system developed gradually organized schools. Quintilian, one of the educators in Rome, recognized the importance of starting education as early as possible and stated that memory exists not only in small children, but in everyone, but information learned at that age is particularly permanent. A Roman student progressed in schools similar to how a student today prepares from elementary school to middle school and then to university. On Lundia days, a kind of weekend every 8 days, they were generally exempted from education. Class advancement depended more on ability than age. Great importance was given to a student's ingenium, meaning the innate gift for learning, in short, intelligence, and also the student's ability to receive higher education. At the foundation of ancient Roman education was first and foremost the home and family, where children received their so-called moral education. While Greek boys received their education primarily in society, a Roman child's first and most important educators were almost always their parents. In the early Republic period, parents taught their children the agricultural, domestic, and military skills necessary for living, as well as the moral and civic responsibilities expected of them as citizens. Roman education was conducted almost solely at home under the direction of family fathers. Children receiving education learned from their parents or the family's highest-ranking male, generally enough reading, writing, and arithmetic to understand simple commercial transactions and to count, weigh, and measure. Men like the famous Republic advocate Senator Cato remained loyal to this Roman tradition and took their teaching role very seriously. In old age, Cato not only raised his children to be hard-working, good citizens and responsible Romans, but was also his son's reading teacher, law professor, and athletic trainer. He taught his son not only to throw the javelin, fight in armor, and ride horses, but also to box, endure both heat and cold, and swim well. Work education was also valued. Boys gained valuable experience through apprenticeships. However, mothers' roles as moral educators and character developers of their children certainly can't be overlooked. In fact, Cornelia, the mother of Gracchus the African, is seen as the most important factor enabling the development of her son's famous good speaking and oratory ability. Perhaps the most important role parents had in their children's education was to instill in them respect for tradition as well as a solid understanding of pietas and commitment to duty. This meant for a man loyalty to the state, and for a girl loyalty to her husband and family. As the Roman Republic transitioned toward more systematic education, parents began to hire private teachers for this advanced academic education. Romans began to bring Greek slaves to Rome to further enrich their children's knowledge and potential. However, Romans always preserved the tradition of pietas and the understanding that the father is his child's teacher.
Sexual life in Rome. Sexual life in ancient Rome had a wide range and freedom. Almost every wealthy Roman's very young male and female slave was tasked with providing sexual service to him. They could be with these slaves under their hands at all times. Actually, if you look at it, one of the most normal situations of the Roman period is men having young boys. This relationship they established with younger men who weren't their peers and with whom they didn't nurture an emotional bond was seen as masculine and was a tendency that the majority of Roman men had. Also, you had to be the active side of the relationship, not the passive. As long as you obeyed these rules, whether slave or sex worker, you were free to be with anyone. From time to time, we see the Lex Scantinia law also coming into play. This law deals with sexual assault on a free Roman man, and if you use a free Roman man passively in a sexual sense, you could fall under this law. However, most of the time, if the victim in question wasn't in good condition, the case was ignored. Although laws regarding sexual crimes in Rome were issued from time to time, they weren't generally dominant and only concerned free citizens. No sexual orientation towards slaves fell under crime. So much so that in Latin, Rome's official language, there's no word directly equivalent to homosexual or heterosexual. Every Roman child, as soon as they woke up and got out of bed with the dawn in the morning, would put on a protective amulet called a bulla around their neck. This amulet was a definite sign that they were sexually untouchable. When they reached the age of majority, they would remove this amulet and step into sexuality under the protection of Liber, the god of both political and sexual freedom. In the legions, homosexual acts between soldiers were considered a violation of military discipline, and those involved in such acts were subjected to severe punishments. Greek historian Polybius reports in his writings that homosexual behavior among soldiers was punished by fustuarium, being beaten with clubs until death. However, the general freedoms granted to men didn't apply to women. A woman being the dominant side wasn't something acceptable to ancient Romans, because they saw being the dominant side in a sexual relationship as a symbol of power and authority. Although anal sex is a taboo for most civilizations, we can say it was quite popular in ancient Rome. So much so that it even had a place in laws. Emperor Tiberius had slaves expert on this subject. Young men were trained to satisfy Tiberius's desires. In fact, Tiberius even had a villa built in Capri just for these affairs. In ancient Rome, not only slaves but also gladiators were used as sex and entertainment tools. Men fighting for their lives in the arena aroused the desires of upper-class women. Of course, this situation also caused various scandals to break out. Emperor Marcus's wife, Faustina, felt great lust for gladiators. To overcome this lust, Faustina, who consulted a fortune teller, had relations with a gladiator on the fortune teller's advice, and had that gladiator killed and bathed in his blood. Thus, she believed she would be purified of her lust. Immediately after being cleansed with the gladiator's blood, she had relations with Marcus Aurelius. A married woman had to be chaste, and infidelity by a married woman could be punished by death. In Rome, gladiators were, so to speak, the stars of society and caused excitement among women. It wasn't surprising to see women shouting gladiators' names at their fights in the arena, opening their breasts for them to see, and young girls extending notes to them from behind cages. A meter consisting of the expression "Celadus the Thracian makes the girls sigh" has survived to the present day. This was a wall inscription. Roman women raised emotionally on this subject must have experienced a conscientious shock if they made a mistake like cheating. Great importance was given to the virginity of the woman to be married in Rome. Honorable and chaste women were always respected. Since the woman was both wife and mother from this situation, it could be concluded that women with prestige in society would also raise their children well. It's estimated that 15% of women aged 20 to 29 in Rome were widows, and the biggest reason for the large number of widowed women is the large age difference between spouses. Indeed, elderly men marrying young girls was a common behavior in Rome, and most women in Rome became widows through their husbands' deaths rather than through divorce. There was serious social pressure on women widowed at a young age. Especially women widowed by their husbands' deaths and who had children were forced to remarry within 2 years because women couldn't care for their children themselves. When women married, they came under the rule of their husbands' fathers. In other words, the woman was now under the control of her husband's father in the eyes.
So friends, daily life in Rome was briefly like this. Don't think it's over. We'll continue to examine daily life in Rome section by section, field by field. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon!